Hi, everybody. Today I am here to talk to you a little bit about coping with a new diagnosis of celiac disease or gluten sensitivity. My name is Dr. Shana Coburn. I'm the psychologist for the celiac disease program at Children's National, and I just wanted to share with you some different strategies and ideas to help get you started. So a new diagnosis can be really challenging. It has a lot of different layers regardless of the diagnosis. So gluten sensitivity, celiac disease, or food allergy to something like wheat or a related food. This has a lot of different factors at play. There's the physical piece of doing all the testing and the medical procedures that are needed. There's trying to change the diet and having your child try and understand what's going on. Academic things. We have so much to learn, really steep learning curve, and this can be very overwhelming. That can really lead to emotional overload. This is completely to be expected, and I'm here to tell you that it will get better, but it's absolutely normal to feel a little bit overwhelmed by everything that's going on so far. So as you could expect, the gluten-free diet is stressful. This is something that we know. It's stressful for children, but it's also stressful for their parents. So there are a lot of different reasons why the gluten-free diet can be stressful. One is that kids can continue to have ongoing symptoms even when they've started the gluten-free diet. It doesn't always pay off right away. And for most people, in fact, it takes quite a bit of time for the body to heal and for symptoms to get better. You're also dealing with the diagnosis itself, the idea that your child has a long-term condition that maybe changes the idea of what your child's life might look like to you. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of the parent experiences as well. Something else that comes up a lot is guilt. Maybe parents feeling guilty that they didn't help their child get a diagnosis sooner. Maybe feeling like it's somehow their fault, like they might have done something wrong that could have led to their child having celiac disease or gluten sensitivity. And I'll talk about that as well because this is normal to feel, but it's probably not useful to kind of beat ourselves up over these kinds of things, and instead to recognize our efforts. And then, the gluten-free diet really affects social interactions and relationships. It has a massive change in the way that you and your child live their life. And there are always risks and temptations, and it requires paying attention to everything going into your child's mouth. So this is a lot to deal with. So what are some things that come up when all of these challenges arise? One is different unhelpful ways to think about the situation. Of course, it is very stressful, but something we need to be careful of is thinking that the problem is completely the worst thing ever or not a problem at all. These are sometimes called thought traps because they're unhelpful habits for the way that we think about things. Other ways that we might think about our situation could be assuming that we know what other people are thinking, or mind reading, trying to predict what's going to happen in the future, maybe knowing, oh, if I go to this restaurant, they're going to screw something up. So that would be fortune telling, or catastrophizing, making something into a very, very big deal. If my child gets an exposure, it will be the worst thing ever. And so this really becomes catastrophic and a lot harder to handle when we think of it this way. So let's talk about anxiety for a little bit. Anxiety is a completely normal emotion that all people have. It's something that's very adaptive for us, and it is based on expecting what's going to happen in the future. It has a foundation in our ability to protect ourselves from any threats that might happen. So if a tiger is looking at us through the bushes out in the jungle, of course, we need to either be ready to fight that animal or flee and get away. It's very helpful for us to survive real threats to our safety. But what can happen in our world is that a lot of the time we don't have tigers waiting to pounce on us and try and attack us. Instead, it's small everyday experiences. And so sometimes anxiety can get overblown, maybe out of proportion from what the threat might actually be. So what does anxiety do to our body if we continue to have all these worries and fears? Well, it can take us into this so-called downward spiral, which can be very difficult for us to break, especially when we're dealing with a physical illness. There are a lot of similarities between anxiety and medical situations that can make things really confusing to tease apart. So all of these that I'm showing on the screen right now are different ways that anxiety can manifest in the body. Your mind could be racing, you could be disoriented or dizzy. It can affect vision, your sleep, your ability to swallow even. It can really have an impact on our breathing and our heart rates. And especially for people with gastrointestinal symptoms, it can affect our digestion dramatically. It can make us shaky, restless, and overall just feeling pretty terrible. So when we're already feeling kind of terrible because we maybe have a new diagnosis of celiac disease or gluten sensitivity, then we're also worrying about everything that's happening with the diagnosis or happening with starting the gluten-free diet. It can be really tough to pull apart the different symptoms. And so when we're dealing with all of these kind of uncomfortable sensations and worries, we can end up avoiding situations. So there's a lot of change involved with the diagnosis and starting the diet, and that can be very stressful. If we avoid situations that we're stressed or scared of, then it can be a little bit paralyzing for us. And that can shrink our world. So maybe we don't want to travel because it's such a big task to plan ahead. And so then we don't travel, we avoid that. It feels safer that we're not doing it. Over time, it might become, I don't want to eat at a restaurant because I might potentially have a bad experience. There might be an exposure. They might make a mistake. And so then it becomes, well, maybe I'm not going to eat any food that isn't prepared in my house. The more we avoid that, the more it can make us unable to have a quality of life that we care about. This is a challenge because we have to balance it out, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Of course, we need to, number one, protect your child's health, but we also want to be careful that we're not unnecessarily avoiding situations because of fear. And that can really create a cycle and make things worse. So, some coping strategies for how to manage this. Here are just some that I'm going to introduce here, but the big message I want to give is that coping really requires a lot of practice. It doesn't come naturally to everybody, especially when you're in habits where maybe you've had different ways that you've been dealing with things in the past. And a lot of the time it's helpful to get somebody else to back you up and help you out with that too. So someone to remind you of different strategies. Maybe it's some kind of meditation leader, a yoga instructor, a life coach, a therapist, a spiritual leader, or just a friend or family member. So it takes some practice, but I'm going to introduce some of them just to give you an idea of some of the options that you might have. So changing our thinking can affect some of those worries that I've talked about. Accepting physical symptoms can make a big difference in being able to live our lives. Finding balance, like I've mentioned, I'm going to talk about that. Trying some relaxation strategies, finding ways to bounce back and be resilient, and also building some practical skills. All of these can help reduce some of the distress that might come along with the new diagnosis. So how do we change our thinking? The number one thing we have to do is start paying attention to what we're thinking. Notice those thoughts that you're having. And this is true for parents and for their children. What's the worst thing that you think might happen? And if that thing were to happen, what's the likelihood that it might actually happen? How bad would that really be? Fortunately, for a lot of people with celiac disease, their reactions, of course, are miserable and terrible. But if it's not a full allergy, the one silver lining to this is that there isn't necessarily that scary anaphylaxis risk. So chances are, if you have celiac disease and not an allergy, you're not going to be at risk for your throat closing up in a real life-threatening situation. Now, do we want an exposure to happen? Of course not. But if it were to happen, what would be the situation? How bad could it really get? It wouldn't be great, but would you survive? Would your child survive? And the other question is, could something good come of it? So maybe if you try something that you're kind of uncomfortable with or nervous about, maybe something good could happen. Maybe you discover that that restaurant you've never tried actually has a really great chef who is very understanding of how to keep food gluten-free. Or maybe the restaurant is completely gluten-free. Maybe that party that you're avoiding has somebody there who has had exposure to a family member with celiac disease. And maybe they have some really great recipes they could make for the party to help your child eat safely. Or maybe it could be that you do all your homework, you do what you need to do, and something good comes of it because you're able to still go and enjoy yourself at whatever event you're doing. It's just one example of how we can think about the situations that we're dealing with on an everyday basis and maybe worrying a little bit less. The big take-home message here is that some things are beyond our control. Of course, we're going to plan ahead and we want to do our best to follow that gluten-free diet that's so important for your child's recovery, but there are some things we cannot control. There are times that your child will be out of your supervision. You can set things up as carefully as possible, and that will be very good most of the time. Mistakes might happen. That's kind of to be expected, especially early on, and we need to accept this, that some of these things will happen, and the goal is for it to get better over time. Another thing to accept is those physical symptoms. Now, chances are, if your child has celiac disease and has been diagnosed, chances are whatever their physical symptoms are will probably start to get better. Some of them may not right away. Some new ones may creep in. Why is that? Well, we're changing the diet, we're changing behavior. It can be stressful. And what does stress do? It can take some effects in our body. So there can be new sensations that we're dealing with. Parents too might notice that they're starting to have some new symptoms in their body. The most important thing is to notice that sensation and say, oh, I feel kind of shaky, or oh, my stomach kind of hurts. Don't judge it, don't avoid it. So don't try to get rid of it. Don't think that it means you're about to be really, really ill, or that you're dying or something serious is happening. Instead, just be aware of it, take note, and move on. So pay attention to what you're thinking about that sensation. Try and tell yourself, you know what, this is how I'm feeling right now, it will pass. And try and distract yourself. Find a different focus for your attention and move on with your life. So finding balance is very challenging and very personal. When I talk about balance, what I mean is that we want to find that middle ground where we are as diligent as we can possibly be to keep our child safe, or ourselves, if we are the one with the diagnosis, keep that person safe and as carefully on the gluten-free diet as possible, but at the same time, finding ways to live your life. So if it's really important to you that your child's able to go eat at restaurants, or that your family can travel, or be part of a sports team that maybe has different meets, in different locations, whatever those priorities are, achieving it might look a little different than it might have been before having this diagnosis. It doesn't mean you can't do it. It's just finding the correct way to do it where you're going to balance health and quality of life. So it's finding that just right balance, same idea as in Goldilocks and the Three Bears, finding that just right amount of vigilance where we're keeping everyone as safe as we can, but also not avoiding to the point of being paralyzed. And there are always going to be mistakes and setbacks, and these are to be considered opportunities. We can learn and plan for next time. We can say, okay, you know what, this time I forgot to ask if the pasta was boiled in different water. than the regular pasta. Now we understand that that's really important, especially at this restaurant. Next time, what are we going to do? Are we going to go to a different restaurant? Are we going to try it again, but ask a lot more questions? There are lots of different ways that we can problem solve through whatever mistakes might come up. And hopefully over time, the goal is to reduce the number of mistakes and challenges that come up. Finding ways to relax is extremely important for managing anxiety, but that's easier said than done, right? And so these are some different ways you can relax. It doesn't have to take the form of just sitting and clearing your mind and breathing. It can have all kinds of different effects and different forms. So mindfulness is a really great way to promote relaxation. It's especially good, I think, for kids because they can do different kinds of exercises that help them pay attention to the here and now instead of the future or the past. So if we're really worrying a lot, if we're really anxious, that's paying attention to what might happen in the future. And if we're really sad or upset or feeling guilty about something, that's thinking about stuff that's happened in the past. Right now, mindfulness is focused on what's happening in this current moment, not anything else. There are a lot of different strategies, but most of them involve all 5 senses. So paying attention to your touch, your smell, your sight, your hearing, all of those different things, even your taste. So there are different mindful eating strategies you can use. And those can really help ease some distress. Deep breathing is also a really good strategy for quick relaxation, but it's hard to do in the moment. A lot of people think that they're taking deep breaths to relax, but instead they might actually be hyperventilating. So if you breathe too quickly, and if you breathe in too fast, and if you are not kind of focusing on a long, slow exhale, then that can be not quite relaxing for us. So it takes some practice. There are some really great apps and podcasts and, audio guides that lead you through some deep breathing exercises. And those can be really helpful for learning some effective breathing strategies. But you don't have to sit and just pay attention to things and breathe. For kids especially, doing something they enjoy is one of the best ways to find relaxation. So it might be reading a book they really like. I wouldn't recommend using technology too much. It might make people think they're relaxing, but there's a lot of research saying that that might not be the most relaxing for people, at least in the long term. So sure, that might help distract us, but it might not actually relax our bodies. But finding something like going for a walk, playing with the pet, doing a physical activity they like, drawing or painting or playing with a favorite toy, all of those things are really great ways to relax a little bit and forget about some of the other problems. Stretching and exercise is wonderful for relaxation. And so again, it's this activity that can help relax us sometimes. It works out some of those physical sensations from the body if it's caused by anxiety. And it can release endorphins in the brain that kind of signals our body that we're doing okay. And it can really improve our health and our stress level. And distraction is also very important. So like I said, finding things that distract you from thinking too hard, too long about those things we cannot control can all help with relaxation. So building resilience is also very helpful in managing some of the negative feelings that we can have in reaction to this diagnosis. Resilience is the ability for somebody to be able to kind of bounce back and make the best out of a situation. And there are a lot of different ways to build resilience, but the most important thing really is it's the same idea as making lemonade out of lemons, right? Basically, we want to find ways to take our experience and learn from them and grow from them. So maybe it's taking our wisdom and helping other people. Maybe it's finding the things to be grateful for. One exercise I really like is 3 good things. And basically you take a journal or a calendar or whatever you want, and every day, try to write down 3 good things that happened to you that day. Some days it might be harder than others, but you want to always try to write 3 good things. So even if you've had a really bad day, the goal would be to push aside whatever the negative stuff is and write down 3 things that you are still grateful for. Maybe some days that just means I'm grateful to have a roof over my head, to have clothing, and to have food to eat. Now, did I say it's the most amazing, stylish clothing? No. Is it the biggest, most beautiful mansion ever? Maybe not. Is it the best ever food and all my favorite things? Maybe not. But maybe we can still be grateful for the things that we have. Some really bad days, 3 good things might be, I woke up this morning. I'm breathing, right? You know, whatever it is that is helpful for you to remind yourself of all the good things that are going on. And another way to build resilience is to channel your knowledge, your wisdom, your experiences into helping other people. Volunteer work is a really great way to do this, but there are many different opportunities where you can just help out other people, including small acts of kindness, helping people cross the street, picking up mail for someone, bringing food to a sick friend, you know, whatever might be going on. When we get outside our own heads and our own minds, it can change the way we look at our situation, can give us perspective on things. And that really can affect how we do. So it doesn't necessarily have to be related to the gluten-free diet, but building some resilience in general can help us recover when we do have some setbacks that are challenging. So practical skills can also help build resilience. So there is a ton of information that we have available that you've probably already heard a little bit about. So the Celiac Disease Program at Children's National has a wealth of educational materials and activities and programming, as much as you could probably ever want available to you. And that is wonderful so that you can learn as much as you want and need to in order to kind of figure out how to live a gluten-free life, or how to help your child do this. But it can also be pretty overwhelming if you try to do it all at once. So here's the thing. We want to pick one skill at a time. As you go, you'll learn, and then once you feel like you've kind of gotten the hang of it, then you can move on and build from there. So it's baby steps, right? So when we were infants, we didn't learn to walk just by standing up and, you know, running across the room. What we had to do was first we had to learn to lift our head, then we had to learn to sit up, then we had to learn how to roll over and stand, and then eventually take our first steps with a little extra help. And now maybe we don't think about it, but think of all those skills it took to build the ability just to walk. Same idea with the gluten-free diet. There's a lot of information out there, some of it better than others, some of it more useful than others. So I encourage you to be constantly wanting to learn more and trying to build more information into your arsenal, but to recognize you can't learn it all at once. It's going to slip out and get to be way too much. So pick the things that are most important to you, focus on them, and learn it however is best for you. So a lot of the time your doctor's going to tell you to change everything all at once. And of course that's medically ideal, but we do live in the real world. So if that's feeling overwhelming to you, try and find one thing to change at a time. So maybe today I'm going to go to the grocery store and find a new pasta that's gluten-free. And I'm going to try and cook gluten-free pasta, and I'm going to see how that goes. And maybe I need a little extra help, so I'm going to watch a cooking video. Maybe another day it's okay, I'm going to look over a list of all the different ingredients on labels and try and learn how to read those at the grocery store. Whatever you choose to do will help build your resilience over time because you'll have more knowledge, you'll feel more capable. The other thing I want to mention is that with all of the resources on the internet as well, all of the online forums and the message boards, I would encourage you to always fact check. Beware of myths about gluten-free foods and contamination risks. It is true that there are a lot of things about gluten in foods that might be surprising. It can creep up in places that you would never expect. Just the other day, I didn't even think of it until a parent told me that fudgesicles at least at the time of me recording this, have barley malt in them. And I guess I hadn't looked at fudgesicles recently to take a look at that. But there's definitely a lot of fact behind these things. But if you hear certain things in the community, online, if you read it from a blog, I encourage you to try to find out if this is true. Try and verify, whether it's going to manufacturer websites, whether it's checking with your doctor or nutritionist, or looking for resources by medical communities like those from Children's National and lots of other great gluten-free and celiac disease programs. Try and find your information from a trustworthy source. And so related to that, there are tons of great technology tools that you can try and use that might help you cope a little bit with the gluten-free diet. So I'm just going to talk about a few, and I know there's a ton more. There are barcode scanners that can help you identify whether something's gluten-free or not. There are lots of lists that are published out there and maintained for things like medications, ingredients, all of that. Lots of great reviews. So none of these are officially, sponsored by us, but Find Me Gluten Free can be really helpful. It's sort of like a Yelp kind of thing for restaurants that might have some gluten-free options. Again, though, it's based on people's reviews. So it might not be accurate information. You always want to double check with the restaurant itself to find out the details about things. Is that gluten-free? It tells you about the gluten-free status according to manufacturers. There's also celiac restaurant travel cards, which can be really helpful for if you need to explain the need for gluten-free food in a different language. It has a ton of different languages where you can print out the cards for free and bring it with you on a trip. And I also want to briefly talk about the NEMA sensor. So this is a device that has been developed and recently put on the market, which senses gluten in food. So basically, you buy this little device, you stick a little cartridge in it, and you open that cartridge up and put in a sample of some food. And it's supposed to analyze whether it has any detectable gluten in it. This sounds like a very, very useful tool. And for some people, it might be. However, in learning a bit about it, our team has definitely seen that there are advantages and disadvantages to this. We don't really know what kind of effect it can have on people emotionally, behaviorally, in all kinds of areas of their life. What we found is that for some of us, it's anxiety provoking because we don't know what to do with the information once we learn that it might have gluten in it. For other people, it might be really, really helpful and make them feel more comfortable if they're traveling or there's other food they're uncertain of. And this is really a personal decision. The other important thing to consider with things like this is that it's very costly. The device, is not inexpensive, and the cartridges are disposable, so you have to continue to buy more. So certainly these kinds of technology tools can be really helpful, but we don't necessarily have specific ones that we recommend to everybody because it's such a personal situation. And there are advantages and disadvantages to using all of these. The bottom line is that all that knowledge that you're building, like I showed on the previous slide, that will matter more. That will be your best tool for being able to cope with the gluten-free diet and all the challenges that come up. And some of these other tech tools might help support you in that, but it's kind of up to you to explore that and think about how you would handle it. Because again, we don't want to accidentally avoid things just because we think it's maybe not safe. We want to use our own judgment and our own knowledge to make that decision. And that's very personal. That is completely up to you. I do also want to mention that you've probably heard this, but we have an app ourselves that just has a lot of our resources from our program on it and our different events and contact information for members of our team. So we fall into this category as well, that we have some presence with different tools that might help people. But again, might help them, but important that they're learning things themselves. So as a final piece, I just wanted to mention that we also have a bunch of great resources on the website for Children's National. So you can go to our app or you can go to the resources for families. If you search for celiac disease, you'll probably find our app. It's the gluten-free resource guide. And then I want to just have a moment to talk a little bit specifically about how to parent your child who has to be gluten-free. And I'm going to go a little bit in the order of, the age of your child. So the number one thing I tell parents is it's really important for you as parents to recognize that it is a burden for you to support your child. Of course you're going to do it, but it's challenging. And there's plenty of research out there that shows that parents struggle emotionally because they have to work so hard to keep their child safe and worry about their diet and their health. This is totally normal, but it's important to recognize that you need to give yourself a break sometimes. It takes a lot of effort to be keeping up with this all the time. And you're going to need to find ways to cope with the stress of that as well. So you want to use your own coping skills when things get stressful, when you worry about things and you're nervous about things. It's really important to remember, like I said, exposures are bound to happen accidentally. It will be okay. You will survive it. And we want to be careful not to avoid too much. So in particular, you don't want to keep your child home unless they're violently ill or unless they're contagious, things like fever and, strep and flu and stuff like that. If they're incapacitated because they're so ill, of course, you want to keep them home. You don't want to make them have to try to deal with school and have more problems. But whenever possible, if there's any question, if your child has a little bit of a stomach ache, not feeling great, they're not sure, you're not sure, never hurts to send them to school and tell them to try it out. And a lot of the time they'll find that the distraction can actually make a difference for them, even if they're not feeling that great. So it's important to be aware that even when things are not going great, we can keep moving forward with our daily life. So for infants and toddlers, it's, again, very common for parents to feel guilty. And this really does transcend across all of the different age groups for the kids. Here's the thing. It's not your fault that your child has celiac disease or gluten sensitivity. To our knowledge, there's nothing in particular that parents could do that would cause celiac disease. If you have it running in your family, it's just one of those things that manifests itself. Some kids' bodies get wired this way and some don't. So try to give yourself a break. And the most important thing to remember is that your child got a diagnosis. That is huge. There are estimates out there that 95% of people with celiac disease in the world are undiagnosed. That's huge. So many people go their entire life sick, not knowing what's wrong with them, and never getting the diagnosis. So you have achieved a huge feat just by getting your child diagnosed at the age that you have. And maybe it wasn't the easiest, but you got there, and that's what matters. And so when you have an infant or a toddler with celiac disease or gluten sensitivity, if they are sick, if they're struggling with something, you just want to be present for them and soothe them. They're not really going to understand what's going on, and that's okay. You'll be the one watching out for them. With preschoolers, they're going to start to want to have more say in what they get to do. They're going to probably want to eat certain foods and have more control over things. And so you want to find ways to be firm about what they can and cannot do, what they can and cannot eat, but give them choices when they can. So maybe, well, no, you can't eat that cookie, but we have chips that you can eat, or we have carrot sticks. What would you like? And the other thing is trying to frame things positively. So instead of getting stuck on all the things your child cannot have and risks and threats, think about, again, from a resilient perspective, the positive side of it. You can have this. You can enjoy this. Maybe we can't eat cake at the birthday party, but you can play with the balloons and you can draw and you can have some, of your treat that you brought, whatever is going on. Try to find positive ways to frame the situation. For school-age children, kind of early on in elementary school, again, you want to make sure that they don't accidentally get rewarded for staying home sick. So this is not necessarily done purposefully by parents or by kids, but it's very common for kids to start to feel motivated to stay home if they're not feeling well, because maybe they get to lay in bed, they don't have to take a test, maybe they get a special meal, or they get extra attention from somebody in the family. And that's to be expected, but sometimes it can actually keep the cycle going where kids are going to want to stay home sick more often. The other thing is that this is a good time to start building your kids' responsibility and self-advocacy. Now, are they going to know if food is safe or not for themselves? No, probably not. But this is a good time to encourage them to always ask questions about the status of their food and just start learning to read labels. This is something that obviously you would be guiding very carefully, and you would be making that final decision about what's safe for them to eat and not. You'd probably be asking most of the questions, but you want to make sure that they're paying attention to that and learning that. The other thing is that school-age children might worry that maybe they did something wrong and they're being punished for it because they can't eat gluten. So you want to make sure that they understand that this is just the way things are for them. It's just the same as other kids having food allergies to other things, or maybe they have different ways that their body works. We want to try and explain that this is just something with the way their body is. Starting in middle school and junior high, this is when kids really want to start to fit in. They may be much more embarrassed to share whether they have to be gluten-free or not. And that's absolutely okay. So it's up to them to kind of decide how much they want to share about what their needs are. However, of course, we have to keep them safe somehow. So one way or another, there's information that must be shared with friends or parents of friends, but you can talk to your child about their perspective on how they'd like that to get shared and maybe what would be shared. So you want to try to help them feel as normal as possible and to encourage them to continue to advocate for themselves. So encouraging them to be part of meetings with teachers if there's a question about, food at school or something like that. Encouraging them to ask questions at restaurants while you watch and help supplement with any additional information that you might need to get. So again, you're going to continue to monitor them, but you want to give them a little bit more freedom and a little bit more choice about how they go about doing that. And then for adolescents, teens want independence. Just number one, teens want independence, but also a lot of teens find they don't want to be responsible for celiac disease and gluten-free eating. They just want it to go away. So a lot of the time there's ambivalence where the kids might want their parents to take care of everything for them, but they also want to be able to go out and just do whatever their friends are doing. So you want to give them opportunities to build trust and independence while you pay attention to how successful they're being. Talking to them about how they're going to go about finding the foods that they need, or planning ahead and bringing foods, or whatever it is that you think they are going to need to learn to be trustworthy. It's really no different than all the other different responsibilities that you might be placing on your teenager as they get older. And so again, don't forget about all the other things that come up that are maybe even unrelated to celiac disease. Giving them more independence, planning for college, sexuality, drinking. Beer is something to be maybe starting to talk to adolescents about as they're starting to plan for college and things like that. Talking to them about ways to keep themselves safe in general against other threats out in the world. We're just adding the gluten-free diet into that for them. It's one additional piece. And if you're finding out that they're maybe not sticking to the diet as carefully as before or as you would hope, then you can use parenting strategies the same as any other things, same as breaking curfew or whatever your rules are for them. Ultimately, we want to be building internal motivation for them to follow the diet. But until they do, it's completely understandable that they might not really understand all that. And so instead, as parents, you can set those rules and consequences if you discover that they're not following through on that. So in general, the take-home messages that I have for you are, it's completely normal to struggle with this. When you have a new diagnosis, it's a lot. It can be overwhelming. You're not alone. It happens to many, many people. And it's different for every single person. So there's no one perfect way to deal with this. but there are lots of people who go through it. And for most people, it's going to get better. It's going to get better with, just moving forward, taking baby steps. But if you're struggling at all, we're here to help you. And you probably have a good support network you can find who are also available to help you. So ask for help from whoever you're comfortable with if you're finding that things are just really tough and you're getting overwhelmed by it. And I think that will really help a lot. A lot of people find they just need a little extra boost of support, and then they'll start to build all those skills they need, and it'll become a little more of the norm. And suddenly the gluten-free diet is not quite as scary, not quite as overwhelming, and then things will get better. So if you have any questions about whether you might benefit from having some kind of therapy, I'm always available. My email is scoburn@childrensnational.org. And that's the best way to reach me because I'm not always at the desk that has my phone, but you can always leave me a voicemail message as well. And I wish you all the best day that you can, and to try and build all these skills as you can. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Our team is always there. Thanks very much.